Hey, everybody. Today we have for you podcast number 147. Today's podcast is titled, What Makes Your Body Healthy? Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We're Dr. Pete and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast, where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals, living the life that you are called to lead. So, Sandy, today we began the podcast, and you were calm, cool, and collected. And I said, we can't start yet.
You had to add a little bit of anxiety to a healthy level of challenge, I guess.
Excuse me.
Today is going to be a lot of Pete's knowledge. So I was like, yeah, I'm coasting today. And
Yeah.
He's like, no.
Yeah.
So I have my healthy dose.
It's interesting because last week Sandy contributed quite a bit, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm not really don't have a lot to say on this one." But today, I don't know how it came up, but we just got on this topic. So why don't you start with the backstory first?
It did.
Yeah.
So last night at our women's study, the speaker's topic was, "What does a healthy body look like?" And she was talking about a healthy church body, a group of believers. What does that look like, and what does the Bible speak about for that? But I came home and I was telling Pete the topic, and I'm like, this could work, for the podcast and talking about like physical health and what that looks, not necessarily physical, but our human body's health. And so we were brainstorming that a little bit as we prepped today, and we were saying, like, what does it look like to express health? What does the healthy body look like? And we were throwing ideas back and forth, and we came up with, like, it looks like a responsive body, a body that acts in love, that responds appropriately, that has joy, that notices changes in their environment, is like in tune. What else can you think of that we share? Strong.
Resilient.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah. Flexible.
Yeah, that's right.
Mobile.
Yeah.
There's so many correlations, I guess, in the health of the body of Christ and as well as our own physical body. They take on, and I think that's probably why it's referred to, as the body of believers, because it's much like the human body and how it expresses a healthy version.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Okay, so that's kind of how we came up with this topic today.
So there's your backstory, and
we're glad you're along for the ride.
Yeah,
today.
Exactly. Thank you all for listening. I know somebody reached out to me last week and was just thanking us for the most recent podcast. And this morning, one of my buddies, Dr. Chris Brown, was commenting how he got behind a little bit and he got caught back up, and he's like, yeah, that one topic was it was kind of what we were just talking about that week before. So, yeah, it's good. I always just relate what's going on in our life. So that's what today's topic is too. Yeah.
Okay, so point number 1, cultural confusion surrounding health.
Boy. Yeah, boy, oh boy. Cultural confusion surrounding health. So I gotta say that this is something that I, as a chiropractor, I battle with constantly, and that is people are very, very focused on sickness, disease, and symptomatology. That is something that we are hypersensitive to. We are hyper aware of is sickness, disease, and symptomatology. And so we have dedicated a lot of our resources in the healthcare industry to the study of sickness and disease. And so what do we have more of? We put so much attention on this. We have more ways to treat sickness and disease, and we have more places that talk about sickness and disease. We've created this whole industry around sickness and disease, and very little time, effort, energy, research, dollar, you name it, goes into what makes man healthy. And it's really upside down. That is a constant battle. So if we could for a moment just take our focus off of sickness and disease and think about what is it that makes man well? What is it that causes us to create better health and better performance? Um, like if you wanted to be wealthy, you wouldn't continually study poor people,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you wanted to be smart, you wouldn't hang around with people that were of low IQ and just keep studying people that
Right.
struggle in life to understand things. Like you would focus on what you want to become rather than what you don't want to become. So that's something that I think if you could just make that one shift in your thinking, you will see a far greater amount of opportunities open up before you versus being in a state of like always reacting.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Okay, thanks.
So point number 2, we're going to dig into this, is what's your major premise? So what do you think? What's your belief system, I guess? Like, do you think that you're kind of a product of genetics and there's not a lot you can do on your own to change that? Or do you believe that your body's adaptable and that you can make changes that will impact your health? That's a very basic, but I believe I was born to be healthy, and I have a lot within my own control to that I can do to lead me in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is really important because we, as human beings, we are self-healing and self-regulating organisms, and what that means is that your body is constantly trying to fix things. Like when
Mm-hmm.
you get a cold, you don't need an outside source to make you better. What you need to do is to change some things and give your body rest, and eventually your immune system overcomes the virus and you adapt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're born to be healthy, not sick. That's a common saying in our practice, but so many people don't really own that belief system because when crisis happens, when you don't feel well, the reflex thing is to immediately try to treat the symptoms instead of understanding what they really mean. Our symptoms that our body expresses are a way for our body to let us know what the monitoring is, what's going on, and we really should ask the question of what's led me to this point and how can I support my body's innate healing abilities to get better,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so usually if you go back in your history, historically, you can see kind of what leads up to that. I didn't get enough rest. I, ate too much garbage. I had a lot of stress in my life. And then, you know, the disaster happens, which basically you get sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the major premise, which is you're either a product of your genes, you're a slave to your genes, and that's always going to be your outcome. Everybody in my family was heavy, therefore I'm going to be heavy. I'm going to be obese. Everybody in my family struggled with obesity, so therefore I'm going to be obese. Well, you do see that happen in families because most behaviors and habits are passed down generation to generation. But you don't have to be a slave to that. You can change that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have a lot of relatives that have weight issues. I don't have one. And it's not because I have different genetics, it's because I have made different choices and I have different behaviors.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's point number 2.
Point number 3, your environment matters.
So, if there's one thing that you can focus on is it would be your environment. The environment, and a good way to look at this is if you look at the healthiest species on the planet, the ones that do the best and are continuously just thriving, they're the wild species. And they're the wild species whose environments are natural. They are pure. There's nothing that's been altered about them. And so if we think about animals in the wild, maybe it's a harsh environment that we couldn't survive in, but they're perfectly equipped to survive in those environments. And Sandy gave a great example today. I want you to share that, what you saw.
Well, I was just saying to him, like, as we were talking, it makes me think of animals that you see when you go to the zoo. There's this quote, fierce lion lying, a foot away from me on the other side of the glass that doesn't even move or startle when all these people come up. So they've lost that like instinctual health, right? Like to be responsive, and the environment isn't what they were designed for. We all get that. It's not stimulating. It's not at all challenging. And we watched this bear over at the wild, and he had worn down this path, and he would just do the same motions every like 5 minutes, and it was disturbing. Honestly, you were like, it's almost like the animal had been led to insanity from such a small space. And I realize, I guess, some of the benefits of having places where you can go and watch animals, but it just was impactful to me to think of that. And I think for ourselves, like, do we put ourselves in like a zoo environment where it's not where we're thriving? It's not what we were intended for. The stress level is way too high. The people we're around with are toxic and causing us all kinds of stress responses. So something for us to think about in terms of environment, not just like, is our air quality clean? Like, is our home quality clean? Like in who you're around and what your activity levels are and all of that. Like, what are you watching? What are you listening to? All of those things are our environment.
Sure. And one of the things that you talked about about the animal in the cage, right, or in the behind the glass, it's like that animal has lost its purpose, right? It's no
That's huge.
longer
Yeah.
out there, fighting for survival.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in a
Finding food.
yeah, but it's not in a a pride of lions. It's not with a
Yeah.
group that it's supposed to be with. There's no hierarchy that they normally have, and they're not hunting. There's no purpose, right? It's lost its will to even live, and we wonder why when we don't have something that we're striving for, something that we're working on that is meaningful work in our life, then we become depressed because we occupy our time with things that are just not fulfilling, and we wonder why we don't feel good, right? And why our body isn't expressing health. So what environment, this is a question to ask yourself, what environment are we designed to be in? And what was God's plan for us as far as on this planet? Like what was his plan for us and how we are to be out there doing things as a body, right?
Yeah. And I mean, you made me think like it's not in isolation. It's very rare that we are meant to be in complete isolation. The devil loves that. Like, it's so easy to conquer when you take offense easily and you just like, I'm not going to get involved in that anymore. And that's just perfect because, then we escalate things in our mind and we make up these stories. So, being in a body is huge. A body, meaning a group of people, is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So your environment matters, and we talk about what is it that goes into an environment that makes us well, and there's four basic factors to always consider, and this is really point number four. So 4 for 4. And the first two things that we want to consider is purity versus toxicity. So consider that. Is your environment full of things that are toxic, or are there some things that are toxic? Because we want to try to mitigate, eliminate all toxicities. And then we also want to make sure that there's purity. So that's the opposite of toxicity would be purity. So what in your environment, it should be clean, right? So what do we need that's clean? We need clean drinking water.
Air.
We need
Yeah.
clean air, right?
Well, it's not just water though, right? Like that
Right.
made me think too. Like it's liquid are you taking in?
Sure, because liquids can be full of toxins, can't they? They can have artificial colors, artificial sweeteners, and all these different things that, why are we consuming those things? Is it because we're, missing something else somewhere in our diet or in our own sense of well-being? Like a lot of people turn to drinking alcohol because they have emotional challenges in their life, and they look to not deal with those emotional challenges or the cause of those. Instead, they try to treat it symptomatically by self-medicating, and then they get into this habit or behavior that they just say, I can't quit, I'm addicted. you know? So yeah, that's very toxic. So that's the other thing is toxicity, or I'm sorry, the other two factors to consider would be sufficiency or deficiency. So sufficiency means enough of something, but not too much. And deficiency is not enough of something. So we can be deficient in sleep. We can be deficient in macronutrients, which would be starvation, right? Or micronutrients, where those are smaller things like your vitamins and minerals. And hydration. We could be sufficient in hydration or we could be deficient in hydration. And that's an interesting topic right there. We could just stop on for a minute is, it's summertime. So
Right.
what do people tell you to drink a lot of now?
Drink a lot of water.
Drink a lot of water. Well, can you drink too much water?
Yes.
And the answer is yes, believe it or not. The more water that if we drink too much water, it's great to be hydrated, but if you drink too much water, what do? You go to the bathroom,
Flush
right?
out all of the right? All
And
the,
you start to wash out what are called your electrolytes, which is the electrolytes are things like your sodium, your potassium, your magnesium, and these are and we're going to get to this in a minute, but we are a neurologic being. We work like on an energetic system. So electrolytes, think of a battery, has electrolytes in it, and that allows it to maintain its charge. So when we become deficient in electrolytes, what happens? Well, we can't produce.
energy is low.
Well, yeah, we can't send and receive signals through our nerves in an efficient manner, and our muscles begin to cramp, and our brain begins to cramp, and we feel tired and lethargic and worn out. And that's why one of the things that I've learned recently in the last few years was that hydration wasn't just drinking water; it was replacing electrolytes. And I'm not talking about Gatorade because Gatorade's a very poor form of trying to replace electrolytes because it doesn't really have what you need. But I'm talking about adding salt, magnesium, and potassium in the right ratio back into your body, and it's like instantaneous recharge of energy. And it was shocking to me how effective it was.
Yeah, we noticed that when he was up working on the roof one day at camp and it was hot and he was starting to get fatigued, and I brought him a shaker bottle of electrolytes, and you couldn't believe how quickly.
Oh, it was
you
like
know, you felt-
instantaneous. I went from like being almost dizzy and lightheaded because I had sweat through everything because it was humid and hot out. And I swallowed some of that. I drank the whole thing. It tasted, delicious to me at the time, which is weird that salty things could taste so good. And you're always taught to like, oh, don't get salt. Too much salt's going to raise your blood pressure. Well, what happens when you sweat? You lose your salt. Yeah.
Yeah, I had never known anything about that till recently.
Yeah, and this is why people can drink all kinds of water and then they still end up with cramps. I mean, recently talked to a practice member that was doing that, and as soon as he started adding some salt to his water, his cramps went away. Yeah. So very, very simple thing, but that's those four factors, purity and sufficiency, toxicity and deficiency. So you can be deficient in love, you can be deficient in movement and exercise, you could be you can have excess amounts too. Like too much movement isn't good either, right? Yeah. Anything else we want to talk about there?
I want you to go into more of that, but I think that is in point number 5. So let me introduce.
Well, we can go more into
Okay.
that. Yeah. I mean, point number 5 is quite a bit too. But when we talk about purity, ultimately it comes down to delivery to our cells, and we are made up of cells. Cells are made up of organelles. I mean, if you start breaking things down smaller and smaller, you get down to atoms, and if you break down atoms, then you get into smaller things. But ultimately, it comes down to this vibrational frequency. We're energetic beings. When we start to look at us broken down into so there's things that affect our vibrational frequency, but having purity and sufficiency is very super important to that. So I guess that'll lead us into point number 5.
Okay. We live our life through our nervous system. And these were 2 terms I've heard of. Well, I haven't, I guess. So he said eustress, and I had to say, will you spell that? So it's EU stress versus distress. And I had never heard, hadn't known that.
Okay, so everybody has stress in their life, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so when we hear the word stress, we think of what?
Typically, I would guess like environment or, from those around me, right?
Right? So,
Stress from work, stress from family, that kind of stress.
okay, so we live our life through our nervous system. So our nervous system is the interface between the external world, everything around us in our environment, and us, right? So our nervous system is our brain, our spinal cord, all of our nerves, and it's taking in information and it's also creating responses back out. And we either perceive things as good or bad, right? And there is a good stress and there's a bad stress. So think of it that way. Good stress is eustress and distress is bad stress. So distress is anything that really creates a negative or breakdown of our function. So things that create worry, anxiety, create just a breakdown in our body physically. You can have bad stress, right? So jumping off a three-story building, that's way more physical stress than our body can take because our bones are going to break, right? When we hit the ground, it's gravity's just going to be too much for us so that's too much stress of something. But then, exercise is a good stress. You can lift some weights and that stress is good for you. It's stress. And so you're causing a physical stress and it has what's called a hormetic effect. And hormesis is where you have a biological stress that creates a biological positive outcome. So you put a load on your body and you do it repeatedly and your body gains resiliency. So some stress is good for us and some stresses are bad for us.
Could you say you could take that to an excess, like,
Yeah.
any type of a workout, I guess, or even physical work? Like you could take that from being a healthy level to an excess.
Yes. So doing difficult things is not something that we should shy away from, but at the same time, it can have a negative effect. And a lot of people have heard of David Goggins. David Goggins is this guy's like, oh, get in your face, and he's this Navy SEAL that just keeps going and running and beating
Excess.
in excess. And there's a good thing about that, and it's probably part of the addiction of it, is that it affects your brain in a positive way, and it causes your brain to actually expand and grow. But at the same time, there's a destruction to you physically. And David Goggins has had knee replacements because of all the miles that he's logged on his body, and it's literally broken down the cartilage in his knees. So, and he's got this really tough mental state that allows him to endure all this pain and discomfort, and it doesn't seem to affect him anymore. So it's good and bad.
Right.
At the same time, he's breaking down some of his physical body, but he's built up his mind to overcome some of the awful things in the world. And he's also been inspiring for lots of people too.
Right.
But ultimately, our brain is the master system of the body. So our brain needs basically, like every cell in the body, it needs fuel and it needs activation. So activation is through movement.
Right.
So activation is also the transmission of electrical energy, and movement actually causes brain activity to increase. So that's an example. David Goggins is like that. So think of yourself, if you sit around all day or if you have a job where it's very stationary, it's not very engaging for your brain. But we know that if you actually were to have like a walking workstation, your brain would become more efficient and more active because you're forcing things to happen, right? That physical activity
Right.
causes better blood flow in the brain, and it creates these things called BDNFs, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is just really great for brain activity. And then at the same time, our brains need fuel, and every cell in our body needs fuel. So, what is fuel? Do you have any idea what fuel is, Sandy?
I would say, well, it's energy, right? Food. What could be food?
Yeah, and if you were
Oxygen.
to break fuel down, it's down break it down to oxygen and glucose. So our food that we eat, ultimately our cells need those two things first and foremost, oxygen and glucose, and those things get to our cells through what system? Do you know? how do they travel through our body?
Through the bloodstream?
Yeah, so our blood is carrying oxygen and glucose
Mm-hmm.
constantly. And those are super important because what uses the most oxygen and glucose per pound in our body? What
The
tissue?
brain,
The
I would
brain.
say, right?
The
Yeah.
brain uses the most of that. So it's vital. And what we've learned over time is that our nervous system, our brain, the more efficient it can utilize and take oxygen and glucose and turn it into energy, the healthier our brain activity is. So most research today is really focusing on mitochondrial health because mitochondria are the part of the cell that produce energy. They take that glucose and they turn it into energy, which is ATP.
Okay.
And so the efficiency of how well our mitochondria can do that has really affected and impacted our overall physical health and our mental well being. So we see on the rise today dementia, Alzheimer's,
Mm-hmm.
and they're linking that now to the inefficiency of turning glucose into energy.
What are some things that we can do to make that conversion more efficient
Oh, well, there
in 5 minutes?
in 5 minutes, there's a couple of things that I think of right off the bat. Like one is get your blood sugar regulated
Okay.
because blood sugar is one of the most important things when it comes to our health, and it's the most overlooked and poorly understood. So we have diabetes, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance that are just it's an epidemic. It's pandemic. It's everywhere. Everybody in our community has some, just about not everybody, but most every adult in our community has some form of dysregulation with blood sugar. If we were to take all the blood out of our body, Dr. Stephen Janopoulos had this example where if we were to drain the body and we had this bucket full of blood, at any given time, we shouldn't have more than 1 teaspoon of sugar circulating through our bloodstream. And that is how tightly regulated it is. Too much, and we're diabetic, and too little, and we don't live. That's how important that blood sugar regulation really is. So we have all these adaptive ways because our body is self-healing and self-regulating. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
To try to regulate that. So our triglycerides will go up in an attempt to get sugar out of the blood quickly. Our insulin will go up to try to get it into our cells as quickly as possible. So when we eat lots of sugary type foods or things that are high in fructose, like fruits and stuff, our body has to try to deal with that and process that as quickly as possible. And the longer we stress that system, the harder it becomes. It actually does not, it doesn't have a hormetic effect, meaning a positive biological response. It actually has a distress. It actually starts to break down and our body gets worse and worse at it. That's how we develop these diabetic conditions, but we don't always diagnose it as diabetic. Instead, we start to have other symptoms that show up like brain fog. We start to forget things, and it can lead to things like dementia and Alzheimer's. It can lead to other issues with poor wound healing, poor sleep, poor reproductive health. I mean, there's a ton of different symptoms that result from blood sugar dysregulation, not to mention a weaker immune system.
Yeah. Well, it's good to talk about because I know these things, but yet unless we think about them daily, does it affect like what we, do we have that sugary drink or a piece of cake or ice cream or, all of those things. So it adds up. And I was thinking we were at summer camp and there's a candy store and you go play Quizzo at night and watching the kids just consume massive, massive amounts of candy. I was like, oh my goodness, like how do you even fall asleep in the next couple hours? But
Well, it's interesting because kids can handle it because they have not had the duration of exposure to it. It really becomes difficult for that to be sustained, and we'll see kids that do that, and they never change that behavior when they go into adulthood. And those are the ones that really end up with weight trouble.
Yeah.
They start to store that excess energy as fat, and then that leads to a whole other issue.
Because it becomes an addicting pattern, right? Like your
Yeah, it
body
becomes,
craves that.
well,
and-
not only that, but it also just becomes your habits,
Right.
right? It's not a big deal. It just becomes like your normal. And then your body just makes this adaptive change where now we just got to store more body fat. So, and you start to, and as you gain body fat, your stress hormones go up like cortisol, and then you can't sleep, and then your reproductive health gets affected. So, and you said, you asked me a question like, what are some other things that we can help improve the mitochondrial's ability to handle or to produce energy? There's a couple of things out there that you can start taking. One is methylene blue, which
we both take, yeah.
recently dabbled with that ourselves, and it's a noticeable energy improvement as well as clarity. And the other one would be NAD plus, which there's a lot of research on that just beginning and the
What's that?
effectiveness. It's basically a supplement that you can ingest or have injected, and the research shows that the injectable form is far more effective at helping people with things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And basically, it just helps the mitochondria upregulate its ability to produce ATP.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that's there's a lot on the table here. If you guys have more questions about this, I'd be happy to talk to you about it and answer those questions. But as a chiropractor, our focus is always on the nervous system, the expression of the nervous system. So taking care of your spine is an integral part of that too. And I know it's not. There's a lot that we could go into about all that too. But
I know for myself, one of the big takeaway from today is that there's so much that we can do with, with some research and reaching out to the right people. There's a difference we can make.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that was a mosh of just a ton of information, and yeah. So you want to close us in prayer?
Sure.
All right. Awesome.
Oh, Lord, we thank you for today's topic. I thank you for the wisdom that Pete was able to share. I hope that it inspires listeners. I know it's inspired me to think about our choices a little differently, to think about the environments we put ourselves in. Lord, we thank you for being in our lives, for guiding us and directing us and holding us together as a body. And I thank you for the benefits of being within a body of believers, Lord. And thank you for all the listeners, that you would bless them this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, that's a wrap. On this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast, be sure to tune in each and every week to stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we will see you guys back next week.
Have a great week.